Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. When most people imagine an ancient Chinese restaurant, they probably picture a small wooden two-story building, red lanterns hanging by the door, a storyteller reciting tales out front, and a few wealthy men upstairs drinking and chatting loudly. But what if I told you that if we could time travel back to the Song Dynasty and step into the real capital city of Bianliang, we'd realize we've seriously underestimated how luxurious ancient life could be. That dazzling, extravagant building called Fanlou, often seen in Chinese dramas like The Story of Minglan, wasn't just a fictional stage prop. It was real, very real, and its opulence went far beyond anything we could imagine. Today, we'll uncover the truth behind one of the most extravagant landmarks in Chinese history, the legendary Fanlou Tower. To understand Fanlou, we have to start with the northern Song capital, Bianliang, modern-day Kaifeng, Hunan. Back then, it was the political, economic, and cultural heart of the empire, known as the finest city in all of the southeast. Unlike the rigid walled city system of the Tang Dynasty, Song-era cities were open and bustling. The night market never closed. People came and went freely even after dark. Shops lined every street. Voices filled the air, and even the city gates stayed open. In fact, the whole atmosphere was much like today's night economy, just 1,000 years earlier. And in that lively, glittering city, Fanlou rose above the rest. It was built on the southern side of the capital, close to the Bian River, an ideal spot for nobles and scholars to arrive by boat and enjoy riverside views. According to ancient records, it was originally named Jian Fanlou, Golden Fan Tower. The word fan referred to a railing or barrier, symbolizing exclusivity. And with the word golden added, it radiated a sense of imperial wealth and glory. Eventually, people simply called it Fanlou. So how luxurious was Fanlou really? We get a glimpse from Song-era records. The southern Song poet Li Ji once wrote in his Ode to Fanlou that it exhausts the beauty of the mortal world and rivals the craftsmanship of the heavens. And that wasn't exaggeration. The tower had 3 stories, soaring high above the city. From a distance, it looked like a heavenly pagoda suspended in midair. Its main frame was built from nanmu, a rare fragrant wood. The eaves swept skyward, with carved beams and painted ceilings. At night, the entire tower blazed with golden lights, reflected like fire across the Bian River. Passing by in a boat, you might easily believe you'd stumbled into a divine realm. Inside, the decor was breathtaking. The floors were covered in gold-threaded carpets, the walls adorned with famous calligraphy and paintings. Dining tables weren't made of ordinary wood. They were crafted from rosewood, nanmu, and even ivory inlaid with jade. Servers wore embroidered robes, moved silently, and poured wine from gilded kettles with elegance and poise. At this point, you might wonder, who was allowed to enter such a heavenly place? The emperor? The royal consorts? Actually, no. The people most commonly seen in Fanlou were scholars, poets, and wealthy merchants. The Song dynasty placed great value on culture and refinement. Even a newly appointed scholar who had just passed the imperial exam could climb the tower and dine with the elite. As for the rich merchants, they were frequent guests, tossing around gold for one night of refined indulgence. But Fanlou wasn't just about fine dining and luxury. It was also a cultural hub, a gathering place for the greatest minds of the age. Legends like Ouyang Xiu, Su Shi, and Yin Shu all visited Fanlou. One night, Su Shi sat by the window under the moonlight, wine in hand, and composed his famous poem, Shi Dao Gu Tu. Can you picture it? A poet on the high tower, surrounded by glowing lanterns, dancing music, and the reflection of the moon over the river, whispering, "When will the moon be clear and bright?" With a cup of wine in hand, I asked the blue sky. A scene more poetic than any TV drama could ever create. Fanlou also boasted a powerful entertainment lineup. Song-era entertainment was surprisingly diverse, from music and dance to acrobatics and magic shows. Fanlou regularly hired performers from across the empire. There were string and wind ensembles, shadow plays, and early versions of Chinese opera. Even professional storytellers performed there, not the street corner kind, but elite artists who recited epic tales like The Three Kingdoms or The Water Margin. In fact, characters like Jian and Lu Zhishan from The Water Margin were first popularized in places just like Fanlou. And yes, for those seeking romance, Fanlou had that too. But unlike seedy brothels, Fanlou's art courtesans were women of beauty and culture. They could play music, recite poetry, and hold deep conversations. They didn't flirt or allow crude behavior. These women, known as Qing, had higher social standing than regular prostitutes and often married into scholarly or noble families. Many historians say Fanlou was the ultimate symbol of Song Dynasty elegance, a renaissance in miniature. It showcased the era's best in architecture, cuisine, entertainment, and romantic ideals. There, merchants, scholars, nobles, and artists all played their parts in an endless grand performance, a nightly banquet that never truly ended. Today, walking through Kaifeng's streets, you'll no longer see Fanlou's real form. But thanks to vivid descriptions in books like Dreams of Splendor in the Eastern Capital, the tower still lingers in our imagination. And in those colorful pages, we realize the ancients didn't live dull lives at all. In fact, in many ways, they lived with more elegance, romance, and extravagance than we do today. Many people may assume that ancient luxury was reserved only for imperial palaces, a privilege exclusive to emperors and their consorts. But in the northern Song dynasty, a time when the entire population pursued refined living, the splendor of ordinary urban life far surpassed what most of us can imagine today. Take Fanlou, for example. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was the spiritual landmark of Bianliang, the cultural holy land for scholars, and the ultimate check-in spot for the wealthy to flaunt their status. As we've said before, Fanlou was far more than a place to eat and drink. Its true charm went well beyond the word luxury. What made it unforgettable was the atmosphere, the aesthetic, and the rare, dreamlike quality of what Song people called the ideal lifestyle. Let's start with the food. Today, we think we're fancy when we dine on foie gras or black truffle in a five-star hotel. At Fanlou, that was just the appetizer tier. The Song dynasty was the golden age of Chinese culinary culture. According to Dreams of Splendor in the Eastern Capital, Bianliang had countless restaurants, taverns, snack stalls, and tea houses, and Fanlou was the crown jewel of them all. Its menu was a culinary fusion of north and south, land and sea, wild game, and seasonal greens. Dishes like rock sugarbird's nest soup, five-spice abalone, rose-braised deer tendon, and osmanthus glutinous rice dumplings were part of the daily offerings. Even more mind-blowing, Fanlou had its own culinary school of thought. Its chefs pursued perfect harmony between color, aroma, flavor, and presentation. Dining here wasn't just about filling the stomach. It was about living poetically through your taste buds. Every dish had an elegant name and meticulous preparation. Take one dessert called Jade. You'd think it's a basic pastry, but no. It was made from osmanthus syrup and glutinous rice flour, wrapped in shreds of white fungus, and sprinkled with tiny blossoms. It arrived steaming hot, melting on the tongue with a fragrance that modern molecular cuisine couldn't hope to replicate. Now, let's talk about drinking. At Fanlou, wine wasn't for getting drunk. It was for tasting. People favored mellow brews like Huangjiao, aged Shaoxing wine, or osmanthus-infused blends. Even the drinking vessels were works of art: silver cups, porcelain goblets, carved jade goblets. No two guests ever drank from the same kind of cup. That's how seriously they took personalized elegance. But drinking wasn't just sipping. In Fanlou, it was a whole cultural ritual, with games like wine forfeits, poetry duels, and flying flowers. A beautiful woman might suddenly appear, holding a silk scarf, softly reciting, "The stars and wind of last night." If you couldn't complete the next poetic line, you had to down a cup as punishment. You won't find that kind of party game at a modern KTV or nightclub, but that's exactly what gave Song-era banquets their unique charm. At this point, you might be wondering, how much did all this cost? The answer? A lot. So much that even wealthy merchants had to think twice before splurging. Historical records say a standard banquet at Fanlou cost at least 40 guan, which would be about 10,000 US dollars today. And if you wanted a private room, live musicians, and rare specialty dishes, expect to spend 120 guan or more, roughly 30,000 US dollars in modern value. And yet, people lined up to get in. Why? Because Fanlou wasn't just a restaurant. It was a social passport. If you were a newly minted scholar who just passed the imperial exam, your first stop wasn't to report to the authorities. It was to show your face at Fanlou. If you were a rich merchant returning from years of trade, you'd host a banquet there to announce your return. Even visiting poets from out of town treated leaving behind a poem or inscription at Fanlou as a badge of honor. There was even a popular saying among Song-era literati: if you haven't climbed Fanlou, you don't truly know Bianliang. Kind of like saying you've never really visited Paris if you haven't seen the Louvre or sipped coffee on the Champs-Élysées. If you hadn't been to Fanlou, you simply didn't understand Song Dynasty high society. All of this reflected the unique social structure and aesthetic values of the Song Dynasty. Don't forget, this was a civilian-led empire, one that valued scholars above warriors. In such an atmosphere, intellectuals held tremendous influence. They decided what was tasteful, what was vulgar. Fanlou was their spiritual playground, a place where they turned life into poetry and nights into art. It's no surprise that Fanlou appears frequently in classical literature. In Water Margin, Lin Chong hosted a banquet there while serving as head coach in the capital. In Golden Lotus, Shimin Qing often met his lover Li Guijie at Fanlou. Over time, Fanlou evolved from a real place into a cultural symbol, synonymous with indulgence, poetry, and decadence. But beneath all this splendor was a subtle warning. Luxury doesn't last forever. When a society devotes vast resources to pleasure and showmanship, it often signals the beginning of its decline. The glory of Fanlou was part of the dreamscape that was Northern Song's Bianliang, but all dreams must eventually end. As we've said before, the more splendid something is, the more fragile it becomes. Standing on the third floor of Fanlou, one might have gazed upon the bustling streets of Bianliang, the glow of 10,000 lanterns, boats gliding down the river, horse-drawn carriages arriving, scholars composing poems, merchants trading in crowds. But all of it, this magnificent urban life, was built on paper. A single war, a few declarations of conquest, could reduce such an elaborate civilization to ashes. And Fanlou, like everything else, was not spared. Let's go back to the winter of 1127, the year the Northern Song Dynasty fell. That year, the Jian army stormed Bianliang. Temples were burned, markets were ravaged, and the once holy imperial family was captured. Emperor Hejing and Emperor Qianlong were taken north in chains. This catastrophe is remembered in Chinese history as the Jingkong incident. The entire dynasty collapsed almost overnight, and the first to suffer were those very symbols of luxury and brilliance, like Fanlou. According to legend, when the Jian soldiers entered the city, they didn't rush to loot the imperial palace first. They went straight for the wealthy homes and the most famous landmarks, especially Fanlou, a place literally dripping with gold. By that time, Fanlou wasn't just a place of feasting and merrymaking. It was a vault of cultural treasures, calligraphy scrolls, rare paintings, jewels, even artifacts gifted in secret by the royal family. The invaders knew exactly where the wealth was concentrated. That night, Fanlou fell. Some say the chefs, musicians, and clerks scattered in panic. Some abandoned their banquets mid-meal. Some hid in cellars. Others died tragically in the chaos. The most haunting image came from a scholar's account. He described the three-story Fanlou, consumed by flames, collapsing like a golden bird falling from the heavens. Within minutes, the lantern light, the music, the perfume, the poetry, all turned to ash. People called it the sound of a dream shattering. And perhaps the most heartbreaking of all were the people inside. You might not know this, but Northern Song's capital had one of the highest levels of female participation in public life. Fanlou was filled with talented women, not brothel workers, but true artists and poetic muses. They painted, composed music, recited poetry, and inspired some of the greatest writers of the time. But after the fall of Bianliang, their fates were often too tragic to imagine. The Jian not only looted valuables, they captured people. Many of these renowned courtesans and artists were dragged north as spoils of war. Some were sold into foreign lands. Others died along the way. One later writer summed it up with just 8 devastating words. When Fanlou burned, 10 flower maidens died. And with the destruction of Fanlou came the fall of an entire cultural ideal. Let's not forget, Northern Song's prosperity was built on a highly refined civilization. A society where scholars obsessed over elegance, where bureaucrats studied the arts, where the state was gentle and the people were well fed. But such refinement came with a fatal weakness. They prized aesthetics and neglected defense. They pursued self-cultivation but ignored preparation. So when war came, they were defenseless. Like Fanlou itself, gorgeous on the outside, but too delicate to withstand a single blow. The most ironic part? Many didn't even realize the danger until it was too late. Historical records tell of nobles and scholars still feasting at Fanlou, composing poetry, sipping wine, even as the Jian army approached the gates. It wasn't until the fire lit up the skyline that they finally awoke from their drunken dreams. But by then, there was no escape. It sounds like the plot of a Shakespearean tragedy, but it really happened. After the fall of the city, Bianliang made brief attempts at recovery, but it never regained its former brilliance. The Southern Song dynasty moved its capital south to Linen. The north became a war zone. Fanlou's old site. Ruins. Overgrown with weeds. A Southern Song poet mourned. Where Fanlou once stood, now only wind and moonlight remain. And yet, Fanlou didn't disappear from memory. On the contrary, its destruction made it even more legendary. Later generations spoke of it with longing and mystery. Song poets, Yuan dramatists, Ming painters, and Qing historians all wrote about Fanlou, as if trying to conjure it back to life. The famous poet Qianlong once wrote, "In dreams I return to the capital. Does Fanlou still stand? Only scented mist remains, hiding faded blossoms." Even merchants in later dynasties tried to rebuild Fanlou. In Hangzhou, they opened a southern Fanlou. In Suzhou, a water Fanlou. In Nanjing, a Qianlong Fanlou. Each of them a tribute to the lost grandeur of the Northern Song, an attempt to restore a vanished world of refinement, art, and human connection. Today, when people speak of Fanlou, it's often with a sense of melancholy nostalgia. The lavish scenes you see in historical dramas, ornate architecture, silk curtains, elegant music, warm wine, and fragrant dishes are all inspired by the real Fanlou of the Song dynasty. You might think it's fictional, but it's all rooted in history. And yet, you'll never see the real Fanlou again. Archaeologists have searched for its ruins in modern Kaifeng, but all they've found are scattered traces. Most of what remains lives only in ancient texts, poems, and our imagination. And maybe that's what makes it so alluring. Because Fanlou is not just a landmark you can visit. It is a cultural totem, condensed with the deepest emotions and dreams of a lost civilization. It symbolizes a way of life so poetic, so refined, that even today it stirs our souls. But it also warns us. Prosperity must be backed by strength. Luxury must have substance. Otherwise, no matter how beautiful the dream, it, too, will vanish in the smoke of war. So the next time you watch a drama and see scenes from Fanlou, soft music, flowing robes, laughter over wine, remember this. That's not just a script. It's a glimpse into a real world that once shone, burned, and disappeared. A vanished moment of Chinese civilization. This is History and Culture Channel. Like and subscribe are the biggest help and support for us. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.